My name is Josiah Toppin, a project officer with the FASD Initiatives Unit in Alberta Human Services. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's FASD webcast, FASD Best Practices for Supports, part of a monthly series of webcasts on issues relating to FASD. This webcast is part of the FASD Cross-Ministry Committee's initiative and 10-year FASD strategy to provide accessible educational sessions that cover a broad range of topics that are accessible to all Albertans. For more information about this series, check your emails for our regular updates or go to hslearningseries.ca or by following us on Twitter at abhumanservices. Today's webcast will cover current best practices for support serving the FASD community. You will be able to pose your questions to our speaker via our live chat window. We will address as many of these questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Let's start off today's session with some introductions. Our speakers today are Jacqueline Pye and Melissa Tremblay. Jacqueline Pye began her career in mental health as a forensic counselor working with young offenders. Her current clinical and research interests include neuropsychological assessment and interventions for individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. She is involved in projects that evaluate the unique neuropsychological profile of children and adolescents with FASD, as well as evaluating appropriate interventions for this unique population. Melissa Tremblay is a doctoral student in the School and Clinical Child Psychology program at the University of Alberta. Melissa has worked as an evaluator for a number of programs, including the Maskatchewan Life Skills Training Program and the Wellness, Resilience, and Partnership Program, otherwise known as WRAP. Melissa's research interests include evaluating interventions for vulnerable youth and investigating methods for promoting the resilience of Indigenous youth. Eric is our online moderator. He'll pose your web chat questions to our speakers. Today's session is also being recorded, and the video will be posted on the Alberta FASD website about 2 weeks after the live session. Now, I'd like to hand it over to our presenters.
Good morning, and thanks, Josiah. It's a real pleasure to be here today. As always, I am very excited about the opportunity to talk about service delivery for those with an FASD. It's something that I think we get really excited about. It's a topic we are really invested in doing our very best work for. And so when we think about what it means to do best practice, I think that we get very passionate and very excited about the idea. We all want to do our very best. We all want to support individuals to achieving success in the most meaningful ways for themselves. So the need for this project arose a number of years ago, I can't even remember how many, when we started to say, well, what exactly is best practice in FASD service delivery? Because we don't always know. We know what seems to look good, and we know what looks good with other populations or what works with other disability groups. But FASD is a really unique population with a number of unique risk factors and outcomes that aren't always what we're hoping for. And yet we also recognize that success is really possible with this population and amazing things can happen. We just need to know how to capture that, how to get there, and how to define those success trajectories. So as we embarked on this project, we said we need to understand a little bit more about what best practice could look like for this population. Most FASD services at this time are based on very limited research knowledge and a lot of practical wisdom, a lot of fly by the seat of our pants, doing the very best we can in the heat of the moment. We have very little information that guides our day-to-day practice in terms of what will translate to the very best outcomes for individuals. One of the interesting things when we look at intervention research and intervention practice or service delivery work is that just because we do an intervention does not mean we're doing something that is good or beneficial for an individual. And in fact, there's a lot of research out there with other disability groups, particularly within forensic contexts, that tells us that we can actually make things worse when we do the wrong things. And so it becomes really important that we start to say, well, what is the evidence for the practice that we're doing? What tells us that what we're doing is the right thing or the optimal thing or the desirable thing? Because just because we feel like it's good and today it looks good does not mean that it's actually translating to the outcomes that we intend or we hope for an individual. And so we said, well, let's begin this project then by really looking at the research that's out there. And let's say, can we identify and describe what researchers are telling us about what currently is known as best practice? What's actually out there? And so to do this, we generated a best practices guide and a toolkit, a couple of things. And we said, we want to have a guidebook that provides us with this integrated base of knowledge, this integrated set of information that says, here's all of the research, here's everything that we know out there about what best practice looks like. And then here's a toolkit for you, the service provider, that can help you say, in what way am I working within these ideas of what the researchers tell us is best practice, and how can I even help to evolve our understanding of what is a best practice? So it becomes twofold. And these two ideas and these two documents that we thought, this is what we really need. We need the synthesis of information, and then we need the ability to take that information and translate it into day-to-day practice in meaningful ways. So the best practice guide, the first piece that we built. First of all, we focused on a literature review, which is very standard researchy kinds of things and frankly can be sort of boring. But entails just a review of all literature and research as it pertains to what is an intervention with an individual with an FASD, how do we know if it's working, what is evidence of support, effective support. From that, we then said, this is not nearly enough. We need to go into further literature. So then we looked at government documents, program evaluations, and all other forms of literature that we could get our hands on that were able to provide us with a little bit more applied understanding of what might be working in the community. And this was really exciting because research is fantastic in so many ways because it allows us to really have confidence because we can control for a lot of factors. I can control for whether or not you're getting support with your family versus getting support at school versus going to see a counselor. I can look at all different conditions in your life and I can control for different things and say, we're going to just change one thing and we're going to see how much changing that one thing changes your outcome. And so we keep everything else really stable and we're able then to say at the end of our research project that this one thing, changing it, rolls out to this in the long run and has that kind of positive outcome. So do it. This is a good idea. Or don't do it because it's making things worse. That's a wonderful world of research. But it's not particularly practical. I mean, it's great once we have the evidence and we can provide that to you and say, hey, here's some really good evidence. Add this into what you're doing. But it takes a long time to do. It takes a long time to get people involved in that. It takes a lot of money to do. And consequently, it's really slow. Important and valuable and necessary to our understanding, but slow doesn't serve our need today. On the flip side, the reviews, program evaluations, even conference presentations that give us more up-to-date research as it's kind of flowing, give us a little bit more practical in the now feedback. Program evaluations, and we'll talk a bit about those perhaps at the end as well, are just fantastic. And for those of you who are working in programs where you have embedded evaluations and you're looking at outcomes and you're saying, what are the goals of our program and how are we determining whether or not we're having success, those are fantastic. And those sources of information were gold to us and were something that was really valuable because then we could look across large numbers of programs and say, what are all of these programs saying are necessary in order to have success or in order to accomplish a specific outcome. So this is what the best practices guide looks like. It's a compilation of all of these kind of research rigor pieces as well as these community-derived pieces, taking all of the evidence that we could to say, what do we know, how can we put it all together, and then roll that out in more practical ways. We also decided that in doing this, we have to think a little bit, not just about if something is working or not, or if something is important or not, but how confident are we that this is the right practice? So again, working with that knowledge, that kind of safety, or that consideration that we can do harm and we can actually make things worse. We always have to be conscientious as to what are we doing, how do we know it's working, what outcome are we working towards, and how do we know we're achieving that, how do we know there isn't harm. And then as we look at that evidence and as we're kind of being conscientious about that, we're asking ourselves, what is the quality of that evidence? Is it my experience working with one client? Okay, well, that's evidence, and that means with this one client, this worked. That's some evidence. That's a very small level, low level of evidence, because as we know, individuals with an FASD can all look very different. And so that then becomes a low level of evidence. It's some evidence to support this might be a good way to go. But working with one client, even if I worked with 10 clients, that's still a very low level of evidence. The more individuals that you've worked with, the more experience you've the more settings that we see something applied, an intervention or approach or a strategy applied, the more different people that have applied those strategies, the more control that we've been able to implement as we study or examine outcomes, allows us to gain more confidence that this particular strategy or approach or way of doing business is really strong and solid. The quality becomes very high, and the transferability then crosses a lot more, and it's something where all programs would say, we got to do this. That's why we do ranking, determine that quality. What we said is we looked towards studies that had, or ideas or principles that were evident across a number of different places, but really had some evidence. So we're looking at case studies, which are often looking at one or two people, kind of like I was saying, sort of a case study model, or evaluations, which are often what programs are doing, but where there is no control or comparison group. When we do intervention work, or we're looking at how services are delivered and whether or not something's working, we often talk about control or comparison group. The reason for that is so that we can demonstrate that the changes or the impacts that we're seeing on the individual or individuals receiving that intervention are as a result of, or a direct result of that intervention, not something else. So let's say that we do an attention intervention with a 12-year-old or a group of 12-year-olds, and we don't have a control group. And then they get to 13 and we say, gosh, it worked. They're paying way more attention at 13. And yet developmentally, we might expect kids to pay more attention at 13, so that might be a change that would have happened anyway. And so when we talk about control or comparison groups, it allows us to say the control group didn't make that change, or they didn't make as much change as that experimental group. That's why those kinds of studies have strength, because then we have more confidence. Then when we go to policymakers or funders, we can say, without this intervention, this change will not happen. And we know because this is the evidence. So that's what that means. So when we do not have that, the evidence for that approach is weaker. Moderate evidence is when we're looking at quasi-experimental studies, when there are some efforts to control for some factors, but not as much. Or we look at some controlled studies, or one controlled. So we see a study that is controlled for things, that has tried to say, if we keep everything else set, will we see this change? And then good evidence is where we start to see more controlled studies. So we identify these levels of evidence in the guidelines. What they're intended to do is give us certain confidence in what we're doing. They do not mean that one idea or one area of practice is actually stronger than another. They simply mean that the evidence that we have at this point to support that approach is some, meaning less, moderate, or good. So we include them as what we believe to be a best practice because of their persistence across so many areas of documentation. Like, for example, if we see something, and you'll hear some of the examples shortly, that exists across so many evaluation pieces of work, then we're going to say, boy, this is everywhere. Everybody sees this as a core component. However, it's only in evaluations. We don't have any control studies yet to demonstrate that without this, we don't see the same impact. So it means it's really agreed upon in the community, but the level of evidence is not yet at that place where we can say it's good evidence or strong evidence. Doesn't mean it's not coming, and it doesn't mean it's not an essential approach to the way we're practicing. It's just ranking the strength of the evidence, not the importance of the approach or strategy. Just gives you sort of a difference in sort of how we use that language. All right, so we did all this, and we did all that ranking and reviewing, and by we, I mean a lot of really hardworking students, largely, to be really fair, and look at all this information, and pulled out from it 4 core principles. And I'm going to describe these 4 core principles, and then Melissa's going to come and talk to you about all the actually key pieces of practice that fall under these principles that then operationalize into, well, how do you do business day to day? So she'll take you through the process of how do we get this translated into that very practical day-to-day material. I get to do the aspirational stuff, and then she gets to do the actual gritty nuts and bolts stuff. So aspirationally, we said there are 4 principles that seem to permeate everything that we're seeing in terms of best practices. One of them is consistency. I'm sure a lot of you are out there looking at each other going, say, well, this is rocket science right now. But even though we all believe these things to be really important and converse about them frequently, it's really important that we have begun to document them with the assembled evidence to support the idea, as well as a means for us to continue to evaluate them in a systematic way so we can have more confidence and increase the evidence available to say we have to be doing these things. Because that's going to help us change and evolve our practice and get the ability to really take us to the next level. So when we talk about consistency, we're talking about things like dependability and placement. It's not great when we move kids around lots. Dependability in relationship, constant, steady, reliable relationships. Stable living conditions, long-term relationships, support structures that are the same. Consistency, that sameness, that structure, that is across the board. And how we accomplish that is one of those things that when Melissa talks to you about some of the nuts and bolts, we'll talk about what some of those practices are that support consistency. Collaboration. You know, the word collaboration, we use that all the time, and it's bandied about fairly easily. And I don't know that we always know what it means, or if we do know what it means, translating it into the day-to-day work in our practice can be incredibly challenging. It's this wonderful idea and this great thinking, but actually doing it is very, very time-consuming. It can be really hard. And so we're going to talk again about the operationalizing bit of what it means to collaborate and truly and meaningfully collaborate, and how within a service delivery context in a program, we can look at ways to make that more practical and more possible in meaningful ways. Truly integrated systems of responding is how we've described it in this broad aspirational way. We'll get to the nuts and bolts. This requires organizational support, including things like time allotments for meetings and intentional strategy planning. So when we begin to talk about collaboration, you're going to hear Melissa talk about some activities that actually require us to have folks in organizations and working for programs to have allocated time dedicated to collaboration activities, rather than saying, oh, I've got 5 minutes between meetings that I'm going to try to grab a phone call in order to do 2 seconds of collaboration, because it just doesn't work that way, and you guys know it. And there are so many people who are working well beyond their work days and through lunch hours and skipping breaks in order to find ways to collaborate. We need to embed collaborative models into the way we're doing business, and it's going to be critical, and again, it's something that we see across all evaluations. If we don't find ways to embed collaboration into our service delivery, we're burning people out and we're reducing the outcomes in our services. Interdependence. And interdependence is an interesting one, because this is really that dance that's going to look very different for different individuals that you're working with as a program. And so it's, as a program, having the ability to kind of flex between how much dependency and how much independence is appropriate for a given individual that you're working with, or for the type of program that you might be delivering. This includes things like anticipation of transition periods and clear planning to navigate that change or that transition. clear planning. We're talking again about how do we build in time and how do we build in intentionality to practices that we all kind of say, yeah, transitions are important. Adolescence is a tough period. How do we get people to adulthood? These are questions that if you work in the FASD community, you hear probably every day. But how are we actually creating time in our schedules to look at what planning is going to look like? How do we navigate transitions? This also includes, really importantly, development of individuals' competencies in a supportive environment. So it's not just, this is why it's that interdependence, because we're not only saying how do we support somebody, but we're also how do we foster somebody's growth? How do we help them to become the very best they can? This could include, as we are transitioning to adulthood, what does it look like to engage in more of a supported work? Or if you're looking at competitive work, what's an appropriate competitive work fit that we can find that this person can excel? Many of you do this all the time. How do we do this in a very intentional ways? And how, for those of you who are already doing it, and I know because we've seen it in some of the evaluations and how effective it can be, how do we take that learning and transfer that so that we increase all of our capacity? These are things that we'll talk about, and hopefully will continue to evolve once you all have access to the tool guide and continue to give us that feedback and help us to evolve our understanding. Finally, the last sort of aspirational, broad, high-level piece is proactivity. This is learning to anticipate rather than respond. The more we're in a position where we have to react to a crisis, which is often, we all know it. You know, I'm sure you're all the same as I am. My phone rings constantly with what the current crisis is of the day. But the more we can get ourselves to a position where we have sufficient capacity to anticipate the problem and beat the problem there, the more we're going to reduce the kinds of problematic outcomes that we see. This means we're looking at what does it mean to have a success trajectory. This means things like changing our language away from how do we avoid problems in adolescence to how do we create success in adolescence. That's a proactive approach. Not what am I trying to avoid, but where am I trying to go? Defining the trajectory that I desire for an individual or that an individual desires and that together we're going to work towards means this proactive consideration of how are we going to define and consider success? How are we going to develop your competencies to find that? And with that, we can anticipate where there may be pitfalls and where we're going to have to support your success to avoid them. Success-focused trajectories, as opposed to problems avoidance, allows us to define alternatives. It allows us to say, if we don't want this to happen, what would the alternative look like? And when we start talking about alternatives, we start constructing different ways for individuals to approach their functioning and respond to the challenges they face day to day, to navigate the systems that they're working within and the people that they're working with. So we start to then equip people with skills in coping as opposed to just saying, well, you can't do this and we have to prevent this and we have to protect from this. While that's all great and necessary, we need to spend at least as much time or more time proactively fostering the alternatives. Because without the alternatives, what other course do they have? We've never taught that, we've never provided that. So that proactive success building is a really critical piece. Early interventions. The earlier we can do things, we know we can go all the way back to Anne Streisguth and her real seminal work that told us the sooner we do interventions, the better. That applies through the lifespan. 16 is better than 20. 20 is better than 25. 25 is better than 30. Early can be anything. Early can simply be earlier. And that simply means that then we have potentially less complications in that individual's life that we can help them navigate through. The earlier we can do it, the better. But that doesn't mean that there's ever too late. So that kind of provides, I hope, an idea of the goals we had with the project, the ideas we had, sort of how we've conceptualized it and constructed it, and the broad principles that we identified through all of the literature that we reviewed. Melissa is now going to kind of take you through a journey and talk about how all of this has been boiled down into ideas that are operationalized, that become more practical, that become something that you within your organization can say, well, am I doing this or am I not doing this, and how could I do more of it? In order to provide yourself with some feedback to your staff and yourselves, and continue to grow and develop, as we're all trying to do, to become the best we can be. So I will flip that over and turn it over to Melissa.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. So now that Jackie's introduced you to the best practices guide and the overarching aspirational practice principles, I'm going to get into the specifics of our best practice statements and how that translates to practice that we can actually evaluate. So when the best practices literature review was being carried out, stakeholders talked about how if the information from the lit review was going to be useful and transferable or translatable for them, they really needed to have those best practices that we identified operationalized. Because it's great to know what the best practices are, but what's really useful is being able to measure whether those best practices are actually being implemented. And so that's what we sought to do with the evaluation toolkit, part of the best practices guide. So the purpose of the evaluation toolkit was really to allow organizations to do just that. So to evaluate and monitor their current use of best practices, and to provide organizations with a method to monitor and continually improve their services for clients and families affected by FASD. So in order to do that, we use the FASDevaluation.ca website as a foundation. So in particular, this graphic that you see on the slide was developed by Deborah Ruttman, Carol Huberstein, Nancy Poole, Sharon Hume, and Marilyn Van Bibber. So we looked at the outcomes that were included in this graphic, and we mapped them onto the best practice statements that our literature review had resulted in. And so we also developed new outcomes in addition to those that you see on this slide, based on relevant literature and existing FASD evaluation tools and resources. After we identified outcomes, we generated indicators for each outcome. So then we have each best practice statement matched with outcomes and indicators. And then to further operationalize or measure our indicators, we developed 6 instruments, so 3 surveys and 3 checklists. Our 3 surveys are a staff survey, a client survey, and a family or caregiver survey. And then we have our 3 checklists, which are a policies and procedures checklist, a staff training checklist, and a case management planning checklist. And so we'll give some examples of items on each of those tools a little bit later. So I'm going to walk you through each of our best practice statements and how those map onto outcomes and indicators. So our first best practice statement that we have here is related to support services focusing on transitions. And we know that transition times can be challenging for this population because this is when support services often pull back or even drop off completely. So expert consensus would actually tell us that we really need to focus on an extension of care during transitions, such as when people with FASD reach the age of 18, and even more intensive support during these periods, because these transition times can be even more challenging than just going through daily life. So here, our outcome is that clients are supported in navigating transition periods, and then we have a number of indicators related to targeted transition support being included in case management plans, so that would be one of the items on our case management checklist, that clients and families report feeling supported when they're going through life changes or transitions. And so that information we would gather from our client survey and our family survey, that staff are trained to provide support to clients during transitions. And not only that staff are trained, but that they give feedback that that training was effective so that they feel comfortable providing that support during transition periods. Secondly, support services should be collaborative. So our first best practice statement had an expert consensus level of evidence. This one has the some evidence level. So here we're looking at coordinating across multiple services so families can navigate services and systems more easily, and an integrated support system being developed for clients. And so we know from research that this can increase clients' understanding of available supports and services. This is also related to different support services really coming together with common goals for clients. So our outcome there is that multidisciplinary service providers are working collaboratively, they're working together. So toward that, our indicators are that there are policies in place regarding interagency referrals and information sharing, so that facilitates that collaborative service delivery. The agency also has a mandate emphasizing the importance of interagency collaboration, so those we would find on our policy checklist. And again, that clients and families are reporting that staff from different agencies are working toward the same goals. They're not confused about the different goals that different programs or different agencies have for them. And so we would be able to find that on our client and family survey. And moving into best practices related to support worker education, we have a best practice related to an FASD competent workforce. So this means having staff who are specifically trained in understanding what FASD is, what it might look like, and specific strategies or approaches for working with this population. So our outcome is that clients receive FASD-informed services and supports. What that actually looks like is that agencies or programs have policies in place to ensure that current staff have that experience and knowledge, that staff are trained to understand FASD, and that they report that that training was effective because they're comfortable with their level of knowledge in the area. And clients and families report satisfaction with the way that they're treated by staff. So that's all toward FASD-informed services and supports. And next, our next best practice is related to training being framed from a disability context and developing core competencies. So this is getting a bit more specific, but still along the lines of FASD competence. So this is ensuring that staff understand FASD as a brain-based disability, which can help staff appreciate the needs of this population, and core competencies get at how staff should not just be given the information, but also be given a chance to practice these skills to achieve their competence. So indicators in this one are that staff are trained to understand FASD as a disability, so that really specific area of training, and then that staff have the opportunity to practice those skills. And also along the lines of support worker education, support workers should remain current on FASD-related information. So Jackie was talking a little bit about this before, that this requires the support of their organization to keep current on resources and for them to do things like attend educational events and professional development in general. So this would relate to agency policies being in place for staff to have some time for professional development. An FASD training refresher being offered at least annually, and then on a staff survey that staff actually report that they feel their knowledge is current and up to date. And next, support and education for vicarious trauma. So this one is again at the level of expert consensus. Because this population is so complex and can present with a lot of trauma, it's really important for support workers to have the opportunity for debriefing and supervision and to have access to counseling and more intensive support where needed. So our indicators related to this are that staff have access to those supports, they have opportunities for debriefing, supervision, and that they can receive vicarious trauma education, and that they also report a strong understanding of what vicarious trauma is and how to deal with that. So now our next area, general area of our best practices, is related to hiring practices. So expert consensus would tell us that the personal qualities of people working with individuals and families who have FASD are key for avoiding client dropout and keeping clients engaged. So these qualities that you can see are described in our outcome are things like staff are accepting, they're trustworthy, they have some empathy, they're available, and they're also mature. So the indicators related to that are that agency hiring practices emphasize these personality traits that we know to be important for working with clients impacted by FASD. And clients and families report feeling safe, welcome, accepted, and having trusting relationships with staff as well. And also at the level of expert consensus, we have familiarity with complex case management and developmental awareness. This again relates to the fact that many of our clients with FASD have complex histories that often involve trauma, so we want staff to be able to accommodate the communication, learning styles, and cultural and socioeconomic circumstances of all families. Developmental awareness also means being able to recognize which approaches and interventions are developmentally appropriate for each individual. So our outcome related to that is that clients are receiving services that are responsive and appropriate to whatever their unique circumstances might be. And indicators of that outcome would be, again, agency hiring and training practices are emphasizing these complex case management skills that we know to be important. Staff are trained in this area and they feel comfortable in this area. And clients and families report feeling that staff are responsive to their needs. So moving on to the next general area of our best practice statements, individual support. So Jackie again talked a little bit about this with the proactivity aspirational principle. So we have early diagnosis and early intervention here. So these ones actually go beyond the expert level of consensus. With early diagnosis, you can see has good evidence to support it, and early intervention has some evidence. So research does tell us that early diagnosis is associated with better outcomes because timely diagnosis, we know, can help with access to appropriate services and funding, and that can in turn help prevent those secondary disabilities or adverse outcomes like mental health problems, homelessness, involvement with the criminal justice system, and other outcomes that we often see with this population. So when we're talking early diagnosis, some of the literature would suggest that's ideal before the age of 6, but really it's as early as possible is ideal, and it's never too late. So early interventions also improve developmental outlook, and we're looking at preschool age in some literature, whereas others include the period right up to puberty, but again, as early as possible. So indicators here are related to what's included in the case management plan. Does it consider formal assessment, diagnosis, intervention? Are there procedures in place to refer clients for that formal screening, assessment, and intervention so we can make sure that that's done as early as possible? Are staff comfortable with and trained to recognize the signs of FASD and to refer clients for formal assessment, screening, intervention if the agency doesn't provide those services, and really to understand how important early diagnosis and intervention are? And our next best practice statement relates to age-appropriate services. So this one is again at the level of expert consensus. This one's really critical because the effects of FASD are manifested throughout the lifespan, and developmental age can differ from chronological age. So making sure that both of these are taken into account in providing services and really understanding how cognitive and behavioral functioning might change based on transitions and other life changes. So that's what we're talking about with this one. So indicators, case management plans include reassessing clients' changing needs so we understand that those are not static, and also that clients and families report that services are responsive to their needs as they continue to change. So also in the realm of individual support, we have the importance of a positive, strengths-based approach. So this one moves beyond the level of expert consensus. We do have some evidence to support this best practice statement. So here we're looking at drawing out the positive aspects of clients' lives, which research shows is associated with improved personnel development, life satisfaction, family flexibility, and even some areas of resilience. So this is also about promoting the natural strengths and resources of clients and families by emphasizing that dysfunctional or problematic behaviors are often the result of the brain-based disability and not necessarily willful noncompliance. So it's that idea of can't versus won't, and also building on the personal skills and strengths of clients and families. So indicators here, the agency does have an explicit commitment to using a strength-based approach, and staff are trained in and comfortable with that approach. And families and clients can actually identify that staff have helped them to recognize their strengths and draw those out in the services that they're receiving. We also have a best practice statement related to consistency and structure from support. So we know that people with FASD benefit from consistency and structure in the services and supports they receive. Staff turnover can be challenging for this population, so we want to make sure that agencies have procedures in place to mitigate that. So our outcome is that clients receive consistent, structured supports, and indicators are that the agency has strategies and target goals for staff retention, that there are procedures in place for dealing with staff turnover that eases that transition for clients, and that staff are trained in helping clients to deal with staff turnover. Again, with individual support, we're also looking at a focus on interdependence, not independence. So this relates directly to one of the aspirational practice principles that Jackie was mentioning. So while some people with FASD might not have the same degree of independence as their peers without FASD, and they might need a continuum of supports across the lifespan, we can work toward interdependence. So in the literature, this is defined as a relationship where both people are valued, respected, and each one contributes equitably, and where no one person is required or expected to have all the answers. It's a relationship where there's a belief in the validity of each person's perspectives, skills, and insights, and that allows us to collectively make good decisions. So indicators related to this, with the outcome being that clients develop interdependent support networks, are that the agency has an explicit commitment, whether that's a policy or something else, to working toward interdependence, recognizing the distinction between interdependence and independence for clients with FASD. That case management plans also include a consideration of this distinction, that staff are trained to work toward interdependence rather than independence, they're comfortable with their knowledge in this area, and again, that we're hearing from clients and families that staff are working with them on their goals, encouraging them to work towards goals at their own pace. And so we have also awareness and support for sensory processing disorders. So there's actually a typo on this slide. It says that the level of evidence is expert consensus, but it's actually moderate evidence. So we have a little bit more research to support this best practice statement. This is about having difficulty interpreting and organizing sensory information from your body or your environment, which we know a lot of people with FASD struggle with. And so awareness of sensory processing disorders and their impact on behavior can help reframe challenging behaviors and poor functioning. So providing effective services to this population means an awareness of this and being supportive in this way. So indicators are that the agency has done things like adapted its physical environment to accommodate clients with an FASD. Support for sensory processing disorders is included in those case management plans. And again, staff are trained to recognize and support sensory processing difficulties. They know what that means, and they feel comfortable with their knowledge. So now, moving into the area of education. So once a diagnosis of FASD has been made, experts believe that it's important to conduct a functional assessment to determine strengths and challenges. So when we're talking functional assessment, we're not necessarily talking about assessments that give us things like IQ scores and academic achievement. We're talking about assessments that capture performance and behaviors in natural settings. So we look at whether there's a certain skill present, the potential for developing that skill, and what's needed to independently display the skill. So the literature around this is mainly in the area of education, but access to functional assessments can also be important to inform case management, which we have as our outcome related to this best practice. So indicators here, there are procedures in place so that clients can have access to functional assessments, even if agencies or programs aren't offering that themselves. Clients are receiving a functional assessment, and the results of that are incorporated into case plans, and at least one staff member is trained to conduct those, or they're all trained to refer clients for functional assessments. We also have use of a unique learning profile, and this is because people with FASD vary so greatly in their skills and cognitive abilities, so we need individualized programming to meet these needs. And this means a customized learning or education plan for clients who are pursuing education, and so there's actually moderate evidence behind this one. So indicators here are that a unique learning profile is created for each client, that's actually incorporated into case planning. Staff are trained to understand what is an individualized education plan or an individualized program plan, and how do we mesh that with our current case management planning. And regardless of cognitive abilities, people with FASD often struggle with many aspects of day-to-day functioning. And adaptive skills interventions related to areas like social interaction and communication have shown lasting results with individuals who have FASD. So that suggests that they might also reduce the development of secondary disabilities or adverse outcomes. So adaptive functioning includes domains like personal care, safety, food preparation, the ability to work, money management, home care, making friends, and people with FASD learn these skills through concrete, explicit instruction and guided practice. So research suggests, with our moderate level of evidence that we have here, that involving parents in facilitating this is really key to maintaining and generalizing those adaptive skills that clients are learning. So our outcome, we want clients and families to have access to parent-assisted adaptive functioning training. We want those to be included in case management plans. We also want staff to be trained to facilitate access to this kind of training or to provide that themselves, and that they're comfortable with their knowledge in how to refer or how to provide that training. And clients report having access to someone who can help them take care of themselves. So that would be an item on our client survey. So moving on from education into the area of health, we have preventative mental health services as one of our best practice statements. And so that is at the level of expert consensus. So we know people with FASD face high levels of mental health problems, and research really points to the importance of prevention here in order to circumvent problems from becoming intense and even harder to deal with. So looking at our policy checklist, an indicator is that there is an established procedure for referring clients with FASD to preventive mental health services, not just intervention. Staff are allowed to accompany clients to mental health appointments if that's necessary. That case management plans include explicit awareness of facilitating access to these services. Staff are trained to refer clients, and clients and families report having access to mental health services that can serve those prevention needs. Also in the area of health, we have support for accessing medical care. So this is another best practice that falls under the level of expert consensus. Many people with FASD require some help to access medical services and to follow up with health professionals. And like everyone else, regular checkups on physical health are important, in addition to health concerns that would be specific to their disability. So we have quite a few indicators here. There's an established procedure for referring clients to medical care. Staff are allowed to accompany clients to medical appointments if that's necessary to make sure that they're getting these services. Case management plans include facilitating access to medical care, medication management for some clients. Staff are trained in facilitating access and are comfortable with their knowledge in the area. And clients and families report having access to medical services, that should say. Also in the area of health, we have a best practice related to managing sexually exploitative situations and risky behavior. So we're looking at a population that can have some impulsivity, lack inhibition, have some lower abstracting abilities and lower social skills. So that all might lead to an increased risk for sexual exploitation. And we want to make sure that there's some teaching and planning and promoting of a planned approach to sexual activity. So this can take the form of support workers helping clients to understand some of their vulnerabilities and helping them to identify supports and strategies to address these. Also discussing reproductive health. So indicators here that's included in the case management plan to educate clients about these areas like relationship safety and reproductive health. Staff are trained to facilitate client access to this education. They're comfortable with what they know in the area, and clients and families report that, yes, I can access someone who can answer questions about relationships and sexual health. So that would be our client survey and our family survey. Again, looking at health, we have supported recreation activity. So experts believe that participation in health recreational activities is important. It's important for physical activity and also for the opportunities that it provides for teaching moments and experiencing success. So we want to see programs that are pro-social, recreational, and also that include their supports. So indicators here, staff are allowed to accompany clients to recreation activities to make sure that they're actually accessing them. case management plans, including facilitating this access, and staff are trained in this area, feel comfortable with their knowledge, and again, clients and families report having access to supported recreation activities. So moving on from health, we're looking at employment now. So we have client-centered employment services that falls under expert consensus level of evidence. So we know that employment can provide social inclusion, and also that positive, stable work experiences and volunteer experiences can be really fulfilling for this population. So experts believe that job preparation programs that involve things like vocational counseling, supervision, and training can help people with FASD achieve successful placements. So our outcome here is that clients gain skills for appropriate employment, appropriate being whatever it is that suits them, because we know everyone looks really different. So indicators, we have this area included in case management plans, staff are trained in the area, and clients and families report that they've received help to find a place to work or volunteer that's suitable for them. We also have a number of best practices related to housing. So the importance of housing support has some evidence to support this area. So many people with FASD are unable to live independently, and so we know they're at a higher risk for homelessness, whereas stable housing actually facilitates delivery of other support services. So we really want to make sure this is addressed with clients who have FASD. So indicators here are that case management plans actually include something about making sure that clients have access to appropriate housing. Staff are trained in this area, and clients report that they've received help to find a place to live. And moving a step beyond that, we also have the importance of safety and security in housing, where this is at an expert level of consensus. So not only do clients have a place to live, they also have a place to live that's safe and secure. I talked about the potential for exploitation with this population, and so we ideally want to make sure that clients have a safe, secure place to live so that they're feeling safe, they're feeling okay about engaging in social interactions in the places that they live, and so that they can experience success. So we want to see this included in case management plans, so that's one of our indicators, and we would like to see some staff training in this area, and also being able to check in with clients and families to report that their living situation feels safe to them. So moving on from housing, we're looking now at family support. There's good evidence in the area of having a stable home environment. So this is associated with a number of positive outcomes like reduction in behavior and social problems, and a decreased risk for secondary disabilities or adverse outcomes. So for children in care, this means reducing the number of placements and having a dedicated team that maintains regular contact with the family. This doesn't only apply to children though, this also applies to adults. So for this one, our indicators are that the agency does have an explicit commitment to partnering with agencies like foster agencies and group homes to make sure that home environments are stable, that staff maintain regular contact with caregivers and families as part of their case management, and that families are reporting that staff keep in regular contact with them. So that one will be included in our family survey as well. An emphasis on caregiver well-being also has good evidence behind it. So many caregivers understandably struggle to cope, and self-care is critical to meet the challenges of caring for people with FASD. So our outcome here, families of clients have access to respite and counseling supports. So this is included in case management plans, this is included in staff training, and staff are reporting that they're comfortable with their knowledge in the area. And families and caregivers are also reporting that they have access to respite and counseling supports. So this one is really important in and of itself for families, but also to facilitate the success of clients as well. And with the second best practice here on this slide, we have planning for the future. So that's also a major concern for caregivers because often they worry about who's going to look after their child when they aren't able to if they require that lifelong support. So in this way, staff or support workers can provide some peace of mind by helping parents plan for the future. So that should be included in case management planning, and also families and clients are reporting that staff have helped them to plan for the future. That's another one of our indicators here. We also have training in parenting strategies that focus on caregiver attitudes. So this one has moderate evidence to support it. So effective parenting strategies and attitudes are associated with lower parental stress and better outcomes for children. So trainings that address parent attitudes and strategies for problem behaviors, so both attitudes and strategies, are more effective than training that focuses on just one or the other. So parenting interventions, we know, have to be tailored to this very diverse group of families. So indicators here, again, this is included in case management plans. Staff are trained to facilitate access to this kind of training, and families identify that they've been assisted in developing parenting or support strategies, or that the agency has referred them to people who can help them do that. And moving into the area of financials, aid accessing funding is another important area. So like other disabilities, FASD can take a financial toll on families. As children with FASD transition to adulthood, they require additional financial resources, as they often have difficulty finding and maintaining employment. So we want to make sure that clients are supported in accessing funding and also in dealing with finances. So here we'd like to see that staff are permitted to attend appointments with clients to secure financial aid, that case management plans have some consideration for financial management and helping clients secure funding, that staff are trained to facilitate this, and then also the clients and families report, yes, I know where to go to get help with some of my financial problems or even just financial questions that I have. We also want to make sure that clients and families are supported in dealing with the justice system. So as we know, a disproportionate number of people in conflict with the law have FASD. So service providers should be knowledgeable about this or be able to refer clients to people who are knowledgeable in this area. Part of this is recognizing that many adults with FASD might have diminished capacity, so they may need assistance to navigate the legal system. So that's our outcome here, that clients are supported in dealing with the justice system. Indicators, again, staff are allowed to attend court appointments with clients. Case management plans include supporting clients to comply with legal requirements and even just to navigate the system in general. Staff are trained in the area, and clients and families report receiving support in this area if that's applicable to them. Okay, so that took us through each of our best practice statements, as well as how we operationalize those. And so now I'm just going to talk briefly about each of the checklists and surveys that I've been referencing. So one of these I mentioned is an agency policies and procedures checklist. And so this one should be completed by agency or program administrators who are familiar with and have access to the agency policies and procedures that are documented. So this is kind of 2 items that gives you an idea of what this checklist would look like. So for example, under support services should be collaborative, we have 2 items here. The agency has a specific mandate or policies that promote interagency collaboration, and the agency has policies regarding interagency information sharing and service coordination with a simple yes or no. We also have an agency training checklist. So this one, again, should be completed by administrators who are familiar with and have access to those policies, procedures related to training. So again, just an example of what this would look like for both support services should focus on transitions and that we have FASD competent workforces in all systems of care. So again, we're looking at a yes or no checklist, and then those would be tallied up at the end. We also have a staff survey. This one is a bit lengthier, so we divided it into part 1 and part 2. This one, rather than being completed by administrators or someone at the supervisory or management level, would be completed by frontline staff. So part 1 would inquire about what training has actually been received. So staff would say yes or no to items such as I've received training in support skills for working with clients affected by FASD. I've received training in providing targeted support for transitions. Part 2 of the staff survey would also be completed by frontline staff. And rather than inquiring about whether training has been provided, we're asking about how much they agree that their knowledge has been impacted by training. So although it has a yes or no checkbox on this slide, it should really be a Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So we would ask them to indicate their level of agreement with statements like, I understand why FASD is considered a disability rather than a behavioral problem. So again, they could strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. I know how to provide targeted support for clients who are undergoing transitions. So this goes beyond, yes, I've received training, to yes, that training was effective in impacting my knowledge. We also have a case management plan checklist. So this, again, would be completed by frontline staff. It's essentially a list of elements that could be included in a case management plan for clients with FASD. And so this would be in addition to components that would typically be included in case management plans for the agency. So for example, client has access to appropriate housing. Does that show up somewhere in the case planning? A plan is in place to ensure smooth client transitions. Does that show up anywhere? We also have a client survey, and so for this one, we were really aware of the need to have a level of language that was accessible, and so we have a Likert scale here too, with yes, maybe, no, and then don't know or doesn't apply. So the staff at Fill in Your Agency or program helped me find a place to live, make sure the place I live is always safe, help me deal with changes in my life, and accept me. So those ones, again, would relate directly to our best practice statements and our indicators. And we have a family caregiver survey. So with this one, again, we would have a Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So items like, I've been trained to help my family member develop life and social skills. Staff at Fill in the Agency helped me develop parenting strategies for my child, given me information that I need to be a good support to my family member. We also developed a scoring guide, and so we have 3 score ranges for each evaluation instrument. And so you saw that they would be scored on either yes, no, or on a Likert scale, so each of them would be tallied up with a score for each instrument. And we have ranges of developmental, in progress, and the ideal FASD informed for each of the 6 instruments. So in the developmental range, few best practices are being used, and there's a requirement for reflection on and revision of current policies and procedures in order to shift toward FASD-informed services, where our middle score range would be in progress, where there are some best practices already being employed, but the agency or the program could use some reflection on the individual components where they might have scored lower, because those would speak to certain areas that current practices don't reflect what we know are the best practices. And then finally, we have our FASD-informed score range. So this is the ideal, where we have a number of evidence-based methods being implemented, and scores in the FASD-informed range are really what we're working towards. So Jackie's going to talk a little bit about next steps, and part of that is going to be revising our scoring guide, so that this is really a draft, and piloting these is going to help us revise that.
Thanks, Melissa. That was pretty awesome. Yeah, Melissa's quite right. As she said, that scoring guide provides us with a starting point. We're currently working with Catholic Social Services and the WRAP project just to have a number of folks go through these surveys, these checklists, and say what's accessible, what's doable, what makes sense, which questions really are awful, and can we adapt certain things and change things to be responsive. I think a a reminder as we think about these things is we certainly recognize the evolving nature of some of these things. Our evidence is always changing, our knowledge is always growing. So we hope to, with the piloted information, adapt the materials so they're most useful to folks at the beginning, then make these resources available so folks can use them and set, in 2 or 3 years, a period where we then go back, review, update it based on information so that we kind of go through a continuous cycle of updating and improving upon the materials. Because as we all know, practice is evolving and changing. In so many ways, we are pioneers on what it means to do meaningful service delivery to the FASD population. And so we will know more in 5 years than we know today. And in part because we're trying to capture a real snapshot of what we're doing. I think that's one of the most exciting things to me is this is an opportunity for all of us working in programs to pool our data and pool our information and say what's really working, what's really having an impact, what are clients and families really saying they're liking, how are we able to look at the way organizations are changing policy, and then that trickles all the way to the way caregivers, for example, are telling us these services are meaningful to them. What relationship do we see? Are there some of these things that we've identified in here as best practices at this point that as we move forward, we're going to start to say, you know what, we can remove this. This isn't as vital, but this one, wow. If you as a program manager saying, I got to make some decisions about how time is allocated, this is the hill to die on. We're going to get more confident in how we make those decisions, in part because we're able to start really tracking what we're doing across programs at a very high level. Something else that Melissa said that reminded me, and I wanted to make this point, is we're also looking at this as a resource that doesn't necessarily have to be something used by programs who are providing services to individuals with FASD only. In other words, this is something that we could look at to say anybody who's providing services to any populations, which may include individuals with an FASD, could benefit from being FASD informed within their program. So this is not about exclusive FASD service delivery, but rather best practices that are FASD informed. And we've tried to lift this above an FASD specific lens towards an FASD informed lens that's much more inclusive of all possible partners and programs, because we really need to create teams that are big and broad, not just specific. The resources just aren't there. So in addition to piloting to say what makes the most sense in terms of these questions, are there things we need to change and shift so that they're a little bit more useful for folks, is, as Melissa said, working through the scoring system to say really how do we weight numbers. So we play with all sorts of things where we learn how to give weighting or value to different things. So Likert scales could have a certain value, yes and no answers could have a certain value, and we expect that too will shift as we go forward and we start to see how people are completing the surveys, completing the questionnaires, the checklists. So this will be a real back and forth where we're just trying to support the community as we're kind of digging into an inquiry around this. We also hope to continue to do interviews with key individuals. We'll be doing that over the summer with key individuals who have completed these, so we hear from them if there are some things that they really think are concerning or difficult. So we really always appreciate the opportunity to hear back from folks and to do a lot of back and forth, because we're learning together and we're all working together. So that's something that Melissa and I really value. And then what we'll do is, based on all of this information that we get this summer, as we wrap it all up, we'll come up with a final plan working with folks from the province around how do we actually disseminate this in meaningful ways. By dissemination, what we're hoping is that things will be available to programs via an online format, so you could access things through online surveys and online checklists that you can bring in through survey formats. We'll look at we're going to provide folks with a coding system that allows you to code things. So if you're completing it within a given program, you'll have a specific program code that all of your stuff is filled out with. We'll collect information at a provincial level, but we're not looking to compare programs and to say this program is better than that. We're not looking at that at all. We're just looking at how information at these very high levels is working across programs across the province so that we can begin to provide feedback. The reason we're going to give a program code is so that folks within a given program can have access to all that information that is completed by folks at your program, so that you can have specific information on your site that can help you say, oh, hey, we've got our rating scale here, we've got all our numbers. In this area, we are fantastic. We are so FASD informed, we are leading the pack. We feel fantastic. But here's an area that we're kind of developmental. Is that something that we feel is within the mandate of our agency? Is it something that we feel we really want to do more of? Because here's some evidence that we're maybe not doing it as well as we could. It just provides programs with that kind of feedback that they can then use as they see fit. It's something that hopefully provides you with the ability to continue to evolve and adapt your programs with evidence. Evidence that can help you to say, yes, this isn't just what I feel today. And so that's kind of how we see it being useful to both programs as well as at a province level. We anticipate that at a province level, we'll be able to look at the information that's coming in and begin to look at the relationships between what's really felt to be effective by caregivers and what's happening at a policy level that maybe is translating to that. What kind of training are, for example, our service providers really valuing, and how is that looking? We have some fantastic councils in our province right now. We have things like our Education and Training Council, and they're doing amazing work. And we'll hope to be able to provide them with information as we get it in terms of what frontline staff are telling us. And in fact, we look forward to adapting the best practices material as they gather information and say, hey, this is how the training initiatives in the province are coming together in a coordinated way. So when you ask your questions about training, you can ask it in these ways. So we really hope to continue to work with all of the amazing initiatives that are going on in the province so that it's all captured here and we can reflect that and translate it to what does it mean to folks when they're receiving those services. And that's where those caregiver and client pieces become really important, because that's where we start to determine what kind of outcomes we're looking at and what kind of impacts we're having. So that's kind of our next steps, and that's where we hope to take it, and that's what's got us really excited. And I think that, yeah, we're doing something pretty cool here in Alberta. And for those of you who might be watching, I don't know if there's folks from out of Alberta, this is stuff that I think that we'll be happily willing to talk about how we can move it forward in bigger and other ways too. So, you know, you can also send me emails and we can have conversations about it. And so I'm sure that's something we can take forward. Trying to get us all on the same page, and I think it's going to be exciting. So I think we get to do some questions now. I think this is the question point of the day as I look at the gurus at the back of the room here.
Yeah, so the first question that we have for you is quite a few people wrote in and asked if it's possible to get a copy of your PowerPoint and how they can go about doing that.
Ooh, the precious PowerPoint. Yeah, absolutely. I think we can do that. How do we do that? I'm now going to ask folks in the room, gurus with headphones and things on. Do you guys have a distribution way, or do folks need to?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, please, when you fill out the survey after the webcast, please include that you're interested in the PowerPoint. We'll make sure that we get one to you. So then the next question is, where can we access the best practices guide and evaluation toolkit?
We have the PowerPoint for you now. As yet, we don't have the guide available. That will be that dissemination plan. So hopefully, we hope to have it all done with all the piloting by the end of the summer. And then what we'll do is we'll work with folks like Janice Penner and Tara Hansen at the Alberta Centre for Child, Family, Community Research, and some of these other folks who've just been fantastic partners through this, to say, how do we want to now get this, make this really accessible and available? So watch for that, because we'll try to, it'll probably be early in the fall, say September-ish, although it depends on how quick we get it all kind of laid out. You'll hopefully start seeing things from us in terms of how we can begin accessing it. And then we'll have, I'm sure, opportunities where we'll be asking for a lot of feedback from you folks, because as you know, you roll out anything new and we get to discover all of the glitches that are present. So Melissa and I are fully prepared to then spend some time doing a lot of troubleshooting. So we hope to have that all available to folks in the fall, and then engage in some back and forth as we need to try to get the guide and all of the accompanying materials really accessible and working for everyone. That's the plan.
Our next question is, you mentioned that you're open to having conversation with people about how they can implement this. How can they contact you?
That is a fantastic question. I don't even think we put my email into the, I always put my email in the PowerPoint, and apparently I didn't this time. I won't even think about why I didn't do that. So my email, I'm going to just say it out loud here, and then we can even add it to the PowerPoint that will be distributed to folks you want. So we'll make sure, Eric, the version you have to distribute to folks has my email and Melissa's email in it. But right now, for everybody who has a pen handy, my email is, I'm pausing to get them all get their pen in hand. Just this is like the pregnant pause. And J is in Jackie, JPEI, as in Jackie Pie, JPEI at ualberta.ca. So that's JPEI at ualberta.ca. And both Melissa and my emails will be on the PowerPoint that Eric sends out, so we'll adapt that right away for you guys. Thanks for asking, and we really do look forward to hearing from you.
And then this is the last question that we have right now. Will these best practices change as more evidence is gathered?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. And absolutely, we really see this as a moment in time. This is not intended to be the best practices. These are current best practices. And in fact, we will continue to review all of the research evidence and embed that in our kind of next iterations as we go forward and make any adaptations. But we're also going to be really reliant on the information that comes from the community and take the information that you guys provide to create those next iterations. So this will be best practices 2016, and then there'll probably be best practices 2018, or maybe we could do like 2.0 and 3.0 or something really, snazzy or whatever is cool. By then, my kids will tell us. But we plan to put it on a regular cycle. And so when these are released, we'll say, we'll try to update them every 2 years. We don't update them so often that you guys are constantly saying, okay, we don't know what we're working with anymore. These are updating too rapidly. But we want to be responsive to the fact that there is a lot of information coming in. Research is amazing right now, and it's just exploding out there, as are programs. And, hats off as well to all of you folks out there who are doing absolutely amazing work. Again, I said this earlier, but amazing work with evaluation in your programs. It can be a real challenge to say, we want to look and see how we're accomplishing outcomes or if we're accomplishing outcomes. Because when you do something you really believe in and you're really excited about, you really want it to work. So being able to say, all right, we're actually going to measure this and see if it's working can be really frightening. And so many of you are doing it now. So many of you are actually investing time and resources and saying, we want to know what's working. And it's because of that we're able to put this all together in one piece and continue to do so that every 2-3 years you guys are going to see the evolution of this. It's going to be fantastic. And yeah, it's not happening anywhere else in the world. Like, you guys are really leading the way. So I think that's pretty exciting. So I think that's all for us. Thank you very much, and I really look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks again to our presenters, Jackie and Melissa, for taking the time to present on the best practices for supports on FASD. Stay tuned for information on next month's FASD webcasts. To get updates and registration information about each of the sessions, please email us at fasd@gov.ab.ca and ask to be added to our mailing list. You can also find past and future webcasts at fasd.alberta.ca or sign up at hslearningseries.ca. Today's webcast was recorded and the video will be posted online along with videos from all the previous webcasts. The video link for today's session will be sent out to all registrants in the near future. We encourage you to share this video with anyone you think may be interested. If you have feedback about today's webcast, please email us at fasd@gov.ab.ca and let us know. You will also be receiving a feedback email from us. Please take the time to let us know what you thought of today's webcasts. We'd love to hear about your ideas. Have a wonderful morning, and we hope to see you next month.